first state to legalize recreational marijuana. We're here to clarify what you need to know before you mark the ballot. I will ask the panelists a few questions, and then we'll open things to the audience. First, I'd like to introduce our panelists. Get the music.
Thank you.
How's that? Can everyone hear me okay? So right here we have Anthony Johnson in the blue blazer. Anthony is the Executive Director of the Oregon Cannabis Industry Association, the OCIA, working to protect and improve the rules and regulations governing Oregon's cannabis industry, as well as the Chief Petitioner of the New Approach Oregon Initiative, which is working to end cannabis prohibition for all adults in 2014. Additionally, he assists in organizing the Oregon Medical Marijuana Business Conference and the International Cannabis Business Conference. Anthony was a member of the Oregon Health Authority's Rules Advisory Committee, helping draft the administrative rules governing Oregon's state-licensed medical marijuana facilities. A graduate of the University of Missouri-Columbia School of Law, Anthony passed the Oregon Bar in 2004 and practiced criminal defense for 2 years before transitioning to working full-time in the political realm. Right here we have Senator Floyd Prozanzki. Floyd was first elected to the Oregon legislature in 1994. He served in the House of Representatives between 1995 and 2000 and 2003. Floyd was appointed to represent Oregon Senate District 4 in 2003. He was elected in 2004 to complete the current term and re-elected in 2006. Floyd graduated from Texas A&M University and later earned a law degree from the South Texas College of Law. An avid cyclist and home brewer, he lives in Eugene with his wife. When the legislature is not in session, Floyd works as a municipal prosecutor and serves on various boards and commissions. And finally, right here, we have Paul Stanford. Paul is an entrepreneur who's been active in the hemp and marijuana policy reform movement since the early 90s. In 1999, he founded the Hemp and Cannabis Foundation, which now has clinics devoted to helping medical marijuana patients connect with doctors in 11 states. 6 years later, he founded Hemp Stock, a Portland festival that seeks to educate the public about hemp and work toward ending cannabis prohibition. He has produced and hosted more than 500 episodes of the TV show Cannabis Common Sense. Paul, a disabled veteran who speaks fluent Mandarin, spearheaded Measure 80, the 2012 campaign for the legalization in Oregon, which lost with 47% of the vote. Most recently, he put forward 2 initiatives, one that would amend the state constitution to guarantee legal marijuana for adults, and the other that would allow for the use, taxation, and regulation of recreational marijuana. In June, he dropped those initiatives. He is now supporting Measure 53. Now, to open up, I would like to ask Anthony if he could introduce IP 53 and explain it a little bit for the audience. Thanks, Anthony.
Initiative Petition 53, which will have a new ballot and measure number come August 2nd, stops treating marijuana use as a crime. It regulates, legalizes, and taxes marijuana, similar to how we do beer and wine. It sets up a wholesaler, retailer, producer, and processor licenses through the Oregon Liquor Control Commission, who will be tasked with making sure that only adults over the age of 21 are utilizing cannabis, and will be responsible for collecting the taxes that are generated, which are $35 per ounce for flower, $10 per ounce of leaf, and $5 for every marijuana plant that's sold. 40% of the revenue generated will go towards education. 35% goes to state and local law enforcement. 20% goes to the Oregon Health Authority for mental health and substance abuse treatment programs, and 5% are allocated towards drug prevention. There are limited home cultivation allowed, similar to home brewing and making your own wine. That's allowed, and it clearly protects and explicitly protects the Oregon Medical Marijuana Program, so it does not impact the medical marijuana program at all. So if patients need higher possession limits, and the recently licensed and regulated facilities through the Oregon Health Authority are not impacted by the new approach Oregon measure. And finally, the State Department of Agriculture is currently not, it's currently had a policy of not licensing industrial hemp farmers, but that's slowly but surely changing. The new approach measure just mandates that the State Department of Agriculture cannot rely upon the federal government to deny industrial hemp licenses for qualified Oregon farmers. So hopefully it'll help open up a new market for our farmers who aren't allowed to currently possess industrial hemp. So in short, it'll end the arrest of arrest or citation of more than 10,000 Oregonians, better direct our law enforcement resources, regulate marijuana like beer and wine for adults over the age of 21, and generate millions of dollars of revenue for our state.
So the first question we have is, with this measure, how would taxation work? And is there a difference between taxing flowers and processed products like hash oil?
Yeah, and I would like to clarify, in case you hadn't heard yet, today was the day we finally got word from the Secretary of State's office that was qualified for the ballot. So, and that's a testament to hardworking signature gatherers, but also people that have put in years of work for this cause. I see Elby Musika, who's one of the federal medical marijuana patients in our audience tonight, right here. Elby's been a warrior for over 3 decades for medical cannabis, and so there are many people who put in long, hard work for this cause, including those no longer with us. And here in Eugene, I wanted to give a shout out to Jim Gregg, who was a tireless advocate for this cause, who helped bring around Attorney General Ellen Rosenblum to our cause, and Jim just passed away recently, and he did more activism from a wheelchair than many people did over their entire lives. So I really appreciate everybody that's worked hard for this cause over the years. It's not just the new approach measure, this measure that got on the ballot. It took day after day, people coming out of the closet, working hard to bring this issue to the forefront, to we're finally here and ready to end cannabis prohibition and stop treating marijuana use like a crime. Now to your question. Thank you. Question of taxation. So under the new approach Oregon measure, we tax marijuana one time, and that's after the first time it's produced and sold. And it's taxed at basically $1.25 per gram of flower, $10 per ounce of leaf, and $5 every plant sold. So if you are using the flowers or leaf to make edibles, oils, hash oil, whatever that may be, the marijuana that goes into the product has already been taxed. And there's no additional sales tax, no additional taxes beyond that. We do allow vertical integration. You don't have to be vertically integrated if you don't want to. We think it's one of the things we've taken, like the best from Colorado's legalization measure and the best from Washington's legalization measure, to give Oregon, really small businesses the flexibility to shape their business the way they see fit. In Colorado, the marijuana retail stores have to grow 70% of what they sell. In Washington, you cannot grow and sell. You can either be a producer or a retailer. So it's led to some of the supply problems they've seen in Washington in their rollout. Under the new approach Oregon measure, if you're a producer who sells to a retailer, then you'll pay the tax after you sell to the retailer. If you're vertically integrated to where you're a producer and retailer, you're not actually taxed until after you sell it to your customer. So the marijuana is taxed the same regardless of what product it went into or what you sell it for. It's all about the weight.
Now, this might be addressable to Paul and Anthony. What is the difference between this particular measure and Measure 80 in 2012?
A few differences include the fact that Measure 80 would have set up a new commission, the Oregon Cannabis Commission, and Measure 80 had, this measure has more strict limits as far as home cultivation and home possession.
No, that's it.
Okay. And what did activists learn from the failure in 2012?
And first, I'd like to say I don't consider any measure that's made the ballot a failure. It may not have got enough votes to qualify, but it still moved our conversation forward. And I don't think necessarily we'd be here where we are today if it wasn't for Measure 80 coming first. So I'd like to thank Paul and the activists and everybody that worked on that measure. And I think some of the things that we learned are that Oregon voters, and I think voters in general, they're ready to regulate marijuana like beer and wine, but they're looking for familiarity, comfort, and to know that it's going to be regulated and taxed. And I think with the Oregon Cannabis Commission, I had no problem with it, but I think a lot of maybe voters did, whereas we're hopeful that the Oregon Liquor Control Commission, for better or for worse, it does have a reputation of making sure that only adults over 21 are in establishments like this, and has a track record of controlling and regulating, taxing, auditing, inspections, establishments like this. So I think that's one of the big lessons. Also, I think a big lesson is that we need a thoroughly well-funded campaign, because we're not going to marijuana is not going to legalize itself. So it's going to take a lot of work all across the state, and it's going to take people donating, volunteering, spreading the word, doing what they can to make sure we win this election.
And what have we learned from Colorado and Washington? And what have these two states done especially well or poorly from what you've seen?
Sure. I think that in Washington, the bill was fairly poor. It doesn't allow people to grow their own. It limits the possession to an ounce. If you have over 28 grams in Washington, you have a misdemeanor. If you have over 40 grams, you'll go to jail. So this is dramatically better than that. And in Colorado, they have a particularly onerous system of regulation that requires video cameras on the grow site from seed to sale with a video feed to the state store. It's definitely over-regulated. We've seen prices of $700 and $800 an ounce in Washington, and several $100s an ounce in Colorado. We're not going to wipe out the black market at those prices, folks. I think Initiative 53 will do that, and a $35 an ounce tax is certainly reasonable, and I think it's a lot better.
Yeah, like Paul alluded to, we have a reasonable tax that will generate revenue for the state, but at the same time allow the regulated market to compete with the unregulated market. And the Oregon Liquor Control Commission and even city governments and members of the legislature and the governor's office, they're paying attention to this measure and already, speaking to people in Washington and Colorado and preparing for the passage of Initiative Petition 53. And they're learning from both states. And so, for instance, the OLCC knows that Washington had a big supply problem because they licensed retail outlets at the same time as they licensed growers. The OLCC is very much aware that you need to license growers before the retail outlets. You don't have long lines where you run out of supply. You run out of supply after 3 days, and you don't have another crop for 2 months. That's not going to take care of the black market. So we want to have a smooth transition, and we want to bring people from the unregulated market into the regulated market. And to do that, you need to have a steady supply and not have onerous taxation. So those are definitely two key things we've learned from Colorado and Washington.
Maybe we can expand on why it's seen as a good thing that the OLCC regulates recreational marijuana when presumably they don't have any experience with cannabis. I'd be particularly interested on the consumption side of it as far as monitoring.
Yeah, the OLCC, they have experience with alcohol, they have experience with licensing rules, regulations, audits, sting operations, collecting taxation, and so they have experience dealing with, a relatively similar product. So as all the government agencies go, They just happened to be the best one for this program. The Oregon Health Authority, with some experience dealing with medical cannabis, really made it clear that they only wanted to stick with medical cannabis and didn't want to move into adult use over 21. So we really didn't want to have an antagonistic relationship with a government agency that didn't really want the regulations. Starting a brand new regulation, unfortunately, there are startup costs associated with that. And so when you start off with the state saying this brand new agency is going to cost $22 million a year, whether that's true or not, that really puts you in a tough position to win the election. So the OLCC, has experience with these type of rules and regulations, and they are definitely looking to be educated from patients, consumers, people in the industry, how Washington and Colorado's gone, and they're definitely looking to have work groups around the various issues to educate themselves. And that's one of the reasons why we give the OLCC a full year to develop the rules and regulations, so they have time to learn about cannabis, bring in experts, and pass the common sense rules and regulations.
Yeah, that's one of the things that was impressive for me, is ensuring that you have an agency that actually has some expertise in regulations of substances. This is, from my perspective, what New Approach Oregon was able to do is come together with an existing facility, so you would not find us needing to actually start from ground zero. As Anthony says, one of the things that is very important to myself and many people that serve in the legislature is that we do away with the black market or the underground market. And by having the taxing structure that they've placed in order to move forward, actually will give us that best opportunity to undercut. We've seen historically, when you look at what happened with alcohol when it was prohibited and when it came back, you can actually have the impact of undoing the cartel type of philosophies by actually having a well-regulated industry. I also believe that the OLCC, knowing from my discussions from the executive director, they're not waiting until this passes. They're already there. Anthony said, working and watching to see from those who are actually implementing in Colorado, as well as what's happening now in Washington, to be ready for what is going to come forward. And I guess not saving grace, but I think the part of having a deep breath and ensuring that we move forward in a positive light is that there is a 1-year incubation to actually have it up and running. But clearly I can tell you right now that Steve Marks, who is the executive director of OLCC, has been on the phone with me, and he has made it very clear that he's working with the Department of Ag as well as the Oregon Health Authority, because the measure itself deals not only with the recreational part, but also brings forward some of the stuff I've worked on in industrial hemp, and also where you have the medical part. And I think we'll get into some other questions that will go into greater detail why it's so important that this measure that New Approach Oregon has put forward actually calls out that we're going to maintain a separate system for the medical, and it's not going to be blended into the retail, such as what has been discussed at Washington State.
So let's address that. What will happen to the Oregon medical marijuana program if this passes? And if OMMP continues, will there be separate dispensaries for medical and recreational purposes?
Well, I guess starting off from where we're at, yes, I would expect that they will, one, OMP is going to stay in place. The new approach measure, IP53, calls that out and distinctly says it will stand alone. An important part of that is because I think the needs are very important for all of us to realize as to exactly what that program was set up for and what it addresses. I was fortunate to be able to help move forward after the measure passed back in 1998. We had about 10 years it ran and actually showed how the medical marijuana program was working, how efficient it was, and how it was actually helping patients to actually get the relief they want. Knowing that, and knowing that the citizens actually passed that measure, which was, if I'm not mistaken, was ballot measure 67 back in 1998. What we basically have seen is that it has actually worked to the point of where we wanted to give the patients in Oregon more control, more assurance, and protection. So in 2009, I was able to get my colleagues to actually support changing the scheduling of marijuana from a Schedule 1, which is identified as having no medicinal purposes, to a Schedule 2. And so we are one of them.
3, 4, 5.
We are the only state that I know that has actually taken the step to actually recognize what the people of this state have said, that we believe it does have medicinal purposes and use, and it should be clarified and classified to be a Schedule 2 drug. And so that is something that for me is very important, and clearly as long as the federal government is, to say, behind in coming up where the people of this state and 20 other states in the District of Columbia are at as it pertains to medical marijuana, until they make the change from a Schedule 1 to a Schedule 2, we have to do everything we can to protect our patients in this state.
Under the new approach Oregon measure, as has been stated, we keep the medical program the same. Nothing prohibits in the measure a medical facility also being for adult use. The Oregon Health Authority and the Oregon Liquor Control Commission, who are speaking with each other, they're kind of working out the details of that. So it's possible that we'll see stores set up how they are in Colorado, where one side would be medical, other side's for adults over 21 without a medical card, and the medical patients would pay no tax, and the $1.25 per gram tax would go for people who don't have a medical card. So it's entirely possible under this measure.
And how will this measure affect hemp?
Senator Prozanski's done a lot of work leading the charge for him. How many years did it
12
take
years.
him? 12 years he worked on passing something that is really, since common sense. It has to be one of the most baffling things about the war on drugs and the war on cannabis is that you can buy hemp cereal at the store, but farmers can't grow it. We have to import it from China and Canada. And one of the problems that we saw was that the Department of Agriculture had simply just stated they were not going to accept any licenses from farmers until the federal government changed their policy. That's slowly but surely changing due to recent federal guidelines where the federal government's moving to help hasten that. We just include language in our measure that states that the Department of Agriculture can no longer rely upon federal law to deny licenses from qualified hemp farmers in Oregon.
Now, a lot of people compare this measure to ending the prohibition on alcohol. First, do you agree or disagree that there are similarities between that and the repealing of prohibition of alcohol, and if so, why?
I definitely see very much similarities between the repeal of cannabis prohibition and the repeal of alcohol prohibition. The drug cartels that are creating havoc among the lives of children, innocent people in Mexico, Central and South America. They're basically the Al Capones of today, and they're taking advantage of prohibition prices to generate revenue to fund their activities. And the war being waged around drugs and marijuana are really devastating countries south of our border. And it's really imperative for Oregon, Alaska, DC, and in 2016, California, New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, Massachusetts, Maine. We keep moving this issue forward to put pressure on the federal government to finally have a coherent, cohesive policy that really brings sanity to the drug war and to stop treating marijuana use as a crime, so we can stop the really barbaric practice of locking people in cages for using cannabis.
I see a very remarkable similarity to the two, because if you think and you look historically, marijuana was not prohibited until 1937. And so up until that time, you actually had a legal, viable market. And just because of market shares and, let's say, competing market interests, as it pertains to, say, with industrial hemp. You had Randolph Hearst, who wanted to ensure that wood fiber became the fiber for paper. You had DuPont and other chemical companies who wanted to see cotton move forward, and so they wanted to demonize marijuana. And if you look at what happened with the prohibition of alcohol, you had basically the same setup. It's just taken many more years because of other, let's say, interference and obstacles that came in place. But clearly, I think you will in fact see a change and a rebirth of an industry. And one of the things that's very important to me is ensuring that local farmers will have the opportunity to benefit. What I'm think not only for the hemp, industrial hemp, but also in the marijuana for cannabis, that's where we should allow for the growing to occur. You can see small businesses, and it's going to be a birth of an industry that's going to bring a lot of new jobs to our communities. And you can see what has happened just in Colorado and what we'll be watching in the next couple of months in Washington State to see how that plays out. And clearly we're in a position, knowing that we're the grass seed capital of the world, that we can grow, and it's been shown that we will in fact be able to be in the market on a national basis and actually be branded for the products that we have.
Now, this next question is addressed specifically to Senator Prozanzki. Will anything happen to people currently in prison for marijuana-related convictions? And what about people being charged at the time of legalization, if it should happen?
Well, the way it works is that at the time of the conviction, it was against the law. And so those convictions will stand. That does not mean that the legislature cannot revisit and look at this issue on a, let's call it somewhat of a case-by-case basis. I expect that once IP 53, whatever the ballot measure number is, passes, the legislature will start looking at what is the impact on our prison system currently, and how does it pertain to the changes that we made. I believe it was just in 2013 we did a remodification of the penalties that a person would face if they had previously anything over an ounce was a felony. We changed that through the legislative process to up to 4 ounces is now a misdemeanor. And so I expect that you will see at some point looking at what is the cost drivers for the prison system as to what we think we should be modifying, if anything, at that point. There's no guarantee. I mean, the reality is when they were convicted, it was in fact a felony, and so just the passage of it will not change that. Regarding the other part,
what about people currently in trial if it passes?
well, if they're, I guess it's going to be based on when the charging instrument comes through. The reality, we're going to have this period of time over a year from basically 2015 up to 2016 that you're going to have the transition. I would expect that what you'll see in many of the district attorney's offices and only district attorney's offices do felony work, they will start looking at what the reality is as to what the people have actually passed. And I do believe that you'll see charging practices change based on the passage of IP 53.
I'd like to mention, under the letter of the law, nothing changes. The legislature could very well take that issue up. And additionally, we've seen, especially in Denver and Seattle, once the law passed, we saw prosecutors drop a bunch of charges against people. So I think you will see, practically speaking, an improvement in how people are treated, but we may need a legislative fix, especially as we look forward towards how much money we're spending on these cases, locking these people in prison. If somebody happened to be in prison for 4 or 5 ounces, at their home, which would now be allowed under new approach, I think that'd be something that the legislature, even potentially certain judges, definitely could look at.
We've addressed this a little bit. Maybe you could expand on what impact this legalization might have on the black market.
Well, my goal is to put it out of business. I mean, the reality is we have an opportunity to have an industry become more legitimate and out from underneath the rocks and from behind closed doors and alleyways and everything else, to the point of where you can actually have a viable industry that's actually going to be producing revenue that can go into the state general fund to pay for education, human resource issues, health and wellness, as well as for public safety needs. And so I do, in fact, think that you're going to see let's say, the turning away and the drying up of the black market as it stands today, and that you will, in fact, many of the people I represent in the district I represent are looking forward of coming out and being more public and being able to actually be accountable for what they do and not be behind the scenes and being concerned as to who might be knocking on the doors, be it law enforcement or the bad guys trying to get in and take what they're doing right now. And this is something that spans beyond urban areas. I represent a lot of rural areas of Douglas and Lane counties, and I can tell you that there are a lot of people who have spoken to me about this topic, and they think that this is something that's right for the state, and it will make us all better for it, and we'll have the accountability and the responsibilities will be in place, and then we actually will see revenue coming forward that will help us as a state.
Yeah, definitely over time, you're gonna have more and more people coming into the regulated market. Many people who are growers in the industry today, they want to come out in the open. They don't want to hide. They're proud of what they do, and they should be proud of what they do. And they want to be tax regulated. They want to pay their fair share, just the same as anybody else. And I think you've seen with the long lines in Washington, the sales in Colorado, there is definitely a demand to go into a store, not have to go to somebody's house around the block or on the street. Go into a store, it's licensed, tested, regulated. You have variety of choice, and you know that the money you're spending, your hard-earned dollars, are going to help out your local schools, help keep your roads safe, keep your neighborhood safe. When we have law enforcement going after real criminals instead of cannabis consumers, you want to fund that. And you want to fund drug prevention to make sure kids aren't using marijuana at too young of an age, and you want to keep your roads safe. And I think that people are willing to spend their hard-earned dollars on that, and definitely over time we'll see the underground market in and the regulated market. And as Floyd said, Oregon will definitely be at the forefront of the cannabis producing industry as we end prohibition across the country.
And a final question before we open it up for folks out there. How can people get involved with the campaign for ballot measure 53?
First and foremost, go to newapproachoregon.com, sign up for updates. We will have an organizer and an office open up in Eugene soon. We are going to fight for every vote. We are going to take our campaign all across the state. We've launched a voter registration drive to add. We have a goal of adding at least 100,000 voters to the voter rolls, and we want to see an increased turnout in this election, particularly of young people who sometimes feel like they don't have anything to vote for. But legalization of cannabis is definitely something that impacts them, their friends, their education, their employment opportunities, and really the future of this state. So there'll be plenty of ways to help: phone banking, helping register voters, sharing our message on Facebook, and of course donating whatever you can. There's potential that pharmaceutical companies could make this one of their last stands and fund in opposition. So it's important that we have everybody who cares about this issue to join the fight and check out newapproachoregon.com.
So another thing that you can do personally is make certain that your voter registration is up to date. And it's very, very important, because what you don't want to do is get to the poll, and then when I say the poll, when you get your ballot and find out that you're not qualified to vote because you had a change in your address, you didn't re-register. So very, very important. The other thing I think is important is I tell many constituents, no matter what the topic is, if you believe in it, work for it, be certain to tell your friends, your family as to why it's important. Read through the measure, you'll see how detailed it is. I mean, this is what you would expect. When you look at this measure, it's long. It's about 33, 34 pages in length. But that's exactly what I would expect out of the legislature if they were putting this bill together. We had an opportunity that my colleagues in the legislature chose not to move forward with Senate Bill 1536 that would have allowed us to ask the question just generally, do we as voters want this policy in the state of Oregon? And then we would have come back in 2015 and actually drafted it. New Approach Oregon has taken the lead, and they have a very sound piece of legislation, one that I will be supporting, and as the chair of the Judiciary Committee in the Senate side, will be wanting to maintain the integrity and the continuity of what the voters have put on the ballot. So, but it's very important for all of us to make certain that you don't sit back and say, well, oh, it's going to pass. Believe me, you will see, because of what's happened in Colorado, what's happened in Washington State, you're going to see national money coming in to try to undo, and you're going to hear a lot of propaganda. Just remember, and to who, what, why, and when, as to the questions, analytically thinking, why are these people telling us this, who paid for that, and do they actually have the evidence base to support their claims? I will submit to you that they don't, but they'll do everything they can, and I've seen even in our own legislative process where we had a hearing and we had a gentleman that came in from Florida that basically was telling us all the woes. Now clearly, none of us want to see young kids be exposed to ingesting marijuana. The measure is very clear and very explicit as to what is prohibited, and it will continue to be that way. But at the same time, I do believe this is a time that we can, in fact, as a state, allow for adults of age 21 and over to make a decision that's informed as to what they want to do with in their own lives, and at the same time ensuring that our young people are not going to be exposed or placed in harm's way through this process.
Sure.
So at this point, we'd like to open up the questions. There's this kind woman here who's been waiting patiently. I'm thinking, I don't have much leeway with this mic. If people wanted to maybe come up right over here.
Well, you have, why don't you just restate the questions over here?
I can do that. So your question, I'll let you.
I am Melody Musica, and I thank you for your work, Senator, and all of you. I'm so glad this initiative is on. My question now is, at the dispensaries, with the people who help us, the patients, have to pay $35 an ounce for everything that goes through their dispensary? Do you? No? Okay, thank you. That was my question.
Hi, thank you very much for what you're doing. I'm one of the rare people that doesn't enjoy smoking pot. It reacts badly with me, but I support you 100%, especially because I'm an environmentalist and I know the potential of the uses of hemp. And I also know that the medical uses of marijuana are very important for a lot of people. And I would hope that you guys would support other people that are interested in other types of legalization of all entheogens and all psychedelics and all plants and chemicals that can be used recreationally. About the question is, why, I guess this is to you, Floyd, because you were a prosecutor. Who made the decision to give 35% of the proceeds to the police? I see that there's more than half the people are in jail for nonviolent drug crimes. So there should be less cops, not more cops, and less money for the cops, not more money. So why are they getting all these big bucks?
Question.
So I hate to pass the buck, but I'm going to pass it to the chief sponsor of the measure as to why they came up with the percentage that they did.
So this process to develop this bill took a couple of years. Started off as House Bill 3371 in the legislature, took input from members of the legislature, the governor's office, advocates, even people who didn't agree with us, and the consensus was that these were the areas: education, public safety, mental health, substance abuse treatment, drug prevention, are things the state desperately needs funding for. Now, personally for me, I know that we have more work to do on the drug war, but if we stop arresting and citing more than 12, 13,000 Oregonians every year, law enforcement will have other better priorities for their time. And for myself personally, I have no problem with police officers who are doing a good job. And I think a majority of law enforcement officers do a great job in our community. Of course, there's always a few bad apples that kind of spoil the cart, but for the most part, they want to do a good job, they want to keep us safe, and they're going to have a job to play as far as enforcing the rules and regulations of this measure. Also, you look at some rural areas in the state, like Josephine County. If somebody's breaking in your house at 2 a.m. and you live in a rural area, you call the police, they tell you, can you ask the robber to leave? And call again at 9 a.m. Now, personally for me, I'd like to live in a society where everywhere in the state of Oregon, you can call the police at whatever time somebody's breaking your house, you're a victim of a violent assault, the police have the resources to deal with the serious and violent criminals.
Hello, my name is Glenn Carpenter, and I want to thank you for all the hard work to get us to this point. A lot of us that are older have been in this war for a long time, so it's great that we got here. I have two questions. One, will there be the power to the counties to put moratoriums against this as they did with dispensaries?
I can explain that.
So the question was, will cities and counties have the ability to pass moratoriums like they've done with medical cannabis facilities? And the short answer is no. A city council or county commission cannot opt out by themselves, like 4 votes of a city council or county commissioners. We set up an opt-out procedure that mimics the opt-out procedure for alcohol. So under the alcohol statutes, a city or county can opt out of serving alcohol. I believe Monmouth County was the last dry county in Oregon. But to do so, you have to have an election of the people voted upon in a general election. And so the people have their say. And one of the, carrots or sticks, how you want to look at it, for a city or county to not opt out and to allow regulated cannabis facilities in their jurisdiction are that we take away funding from any place that opts out. So we send 15% of the revenue generated to the state police, 10% to cities earmarked for law enforcement, 10% to counties earmarked for law enforcement. But if a city or county decides to opt out via an election, they lose their cut of the revenue.
I have another question. Will the regulation of testing be improved through the Liquor Commission? Because under 3460, it kind of works. It's kind of this way and that way. And I want to know, are we going to improve that?
Yes, I believe we will improve the testing rules and regulations. House Bill 3460 mandated that medical cannabis be tested for mold, mildews, pesticides, and I believe like THC and CBD content. And so it just mandated what had to be tested, but didn't spell out how exactly those need to be tested. One of the things we tasked the OLCC with doing are coming up with the rules and regulations as far as the testing facilities. So I do believe you'll see more rules and regulations regarding testing so that you don't go to one strain at one testing lab tested 20% THC, but another lab tested at 12% THC. We'll do our best to formulate standards. So we don't want to have an IPA tested at 6% at one lab and 3% at another lab. We want it to be standard, and we think the OLCC will develop rules and regulations around that.
One thing that nobody's brought up is the amount of electricity that is used in the Pacific Northwest to grow pot indoors. I was at a friend's house 10 years ago. His bill was $600 a month. He had a little garage. And I've been in energy conservation, solar removal, alternative
I think that was more of a statement about the need to move towards sustainable grow practices, and I believe that and energy efficiency, and I believe on one hand, I think the market will take care of that, being able to license growers who can now grow outside without fear of arrest and prosecution for one, will allow that. And I think you see a very fervent market in Oregon for sustainability, locally grown, organics, right? And so I think on one hand, the market will take care of that. And if our electricity gets out of hand, maybe Floyd and the legislature will have some LED subsidies or something.
Thank you, gentlemen. As you know, Oregon is an agricultural state, and if you were at the Medical Marijuana Conference, you saw most hands go up for growers. Most of the people in this room maybe are growers. I've read most of the initiative, and it's a little unclear how many people are going to be licensed to produce. Can you speak to that?
Under the new approach Oregon measure, we do not put a cap on any licenses, and we make it clear that our model is the microbrewery beer and wine model, not like the highly controlled liquor model. And I know the OLCC's had discussions with myself, legislators, Colorado, people in Colorado and Washington, and the OLCC does not plan on putting any cap on the number of growers or retail outlet or the number of licenses they're going to have. So you saw in Washington, they put a cap on how many licenses for stores and growers are going to have, and they had basically a lottery system, and people who were awarded a license weren't necessarily qualified to get the license. They were kind of playing a lottery game to where they're like, I don't know anything about growing marijuana, but I'm going to win this license, and then I'm going to try to sell it. And you have people trying to get multiple licenses to kind of game the system. We will not have a lottery system in Oregon, and it'll be people who are qualified to grow and run retail outlets to get a license, just as there's no limit on how many breweries or bars or wineries there can be in the state. The OLCC is not looking to put any cap on the number of grower licenses.
I think this really comes back to the part that we were talking about earlier as to the importance of the diversity throughout the state. Clearly, we have a lot of areas in the state that are really hurting economically. What better way can you actually infuse money into a community to ensure that you have the ability for people to enter the market? And so clearly the growing can occur anywhere in the state, and why not allow for the market to bear what it's going to, and allow those who live wherever they may live, rural areas, urban areas, to actually be potential beneficiaries, because it will in fact put more money into the local economy. And that's one of the reasons I'm very conscious about setting the standards of what we expect, as we're using the framework of what's in the medical marijuana field, and I expect that you'll see kind of an overlay that will go in place for the recreational side as to the quality, quantity, as to what we expect, and making certain that individuals know that they're getting something that is viable, something that is been tested, something that is safe for consumption, and at the same time we will not be prohibiting those in smaller rural areas from being able to participate, just like those in more urban areas.
Thank you. Well, with that in mind, what should we expect recreational grower permits to cost, and what will determine what that cost actually is?
So the new approach Oregon measure sets the licensing fee at $1,250. If you for any size, any license, that's you get a wholesaler, retailer, producer, processor license. They're each $1,250. If for whatever reason you happen to be denied, then $250 is not refundable, but the other $1,000 is. So $1,250 is the cost of the license. That's one of the themes of the new approach measure, is to bring as many people into the regulated market as we can, and we want mom and pop shops, small businesses, small growers, to be able to compete with the market. So we wanted to have low barriers of entry to bring in as many people we can to the regulated market and let the market take care of itself, and the cream will rise to the top.
One more amendment to that question was, is it going to be possible for growers to have a retail outlet in the same location?
So we don't put any restrictions on that, and like we've stated, we'd like a microbrewery, model. So if, just as an alcohol establishment can brew beer and sell the same area, we do not prohibit that from occurring under the new approach measure.
I'm Dan Kuzer, a political activist, legalization activist for over 15 years. I'm a newbie next to Paul. Paul's a little timer when I started, but I appreciate both Paul and Anthony's efforts over the years. I've read both of them, and also Floyd. The thing I want to say is that we are definitely going to make the ballot, but let's don't take it on assumption, as somebody mentioned. We still need to register to vote, very important. But here's the thing that nobody's talking about, and I'm talking to everybody about it. After it passes, the next legislature, that's what we need to gear up for. We need money to fight, because I guarantee you, no offense to Floyd, but the Oregon legislature is going to come after this initiative like a wounded calf in a piranha after a wounded calf in a creek, They tried to do nothing but screw up the Oregon medical marijuana law, which was passed. A good example of that is when they did the despicable act of doubling the patient's fees and creating fees when they were making money. That was a disgusting act, and we're not pissed off about it enough. So, but anyway, that's the kind of thing we're happening. So that's what I'm saying is that we're going to be ready when the Oregon legislature goes into session. Be ready to come to Salem and start demonstrating, because I'll be in front. Thank you.
And one thing I want to touch on that, of course, first is winning, and hopefully winning by a big margin, so we show that we have true political strength, and then we're organizing the legislature, and then it's imperative to support good legislators like Floyd and his colleagues that do good work, and support them as their battle, because they need us as much as we need them.
And Dan, the other thing I guess I would say is that once something is passed by the voters, it's very difficult for my colleagues to really undo it, because it's the will of the voters, and I've heard this time and time again. I gave an opportunity for us to do it a different way with Senate Bill 1536. That was turned down. So now the voters have said, we want this issue. It's now made it to the ballot. And I can tell you in my position, unless something happens that I don't plan on happening, I will still be chairing Judiciary Committee, and then Senate side. All controlled substance issues go through that as subject matter. And so I will be a point person within that process on the Senate side to ensure what the will of the voters is, we'll move forward in the same place.
Is there any mechanism underneath the initiative by which we would have the current 1,000-foot buffer between new retail outlets and schools, as we do with medical marijuana dispensaries?
So the measure prohibits delivery of marijuana within 1,000 feet of a school, but it does not prohibit 1,000 feet from another facility. So just like you don't stop minimums from opening up with 1,000 feet of road brewery, we don't prohibit that. But we do prohibit within 1,000 feet of a school, and we prohibit advertising where children may congregate.
The potential for revenue based on taxation is pretty extensive here. Do you see in the future, if this measure passes, do you see taxation going the way of alcohol, which is remaining fairly minimal and consistent over time, or the way of tobacco, which has frequent increases to fund a variety of different things?
So after really months of contemplation over the tax issue, we believe we came up with a reasonable tax that can generate millions of dollars for the state, fund adequate enforcement and regulation, but at the same time allowing regulated growers and retailers to compete with the underground market. We tie the tax to the consumer price index, similar to inflation, so it will rise over time, but relatively slowly. And we think that that is necessary to ensure that we keep people in the regulated market. Unlike tobacco, Oregon has a colorful and rich history of growing cannabis, and so the tax ever got too high, it would really defeat the purpose of having rules and regulations in place. So the taxation issue will be one that the legislature and the OLCC inspect over time, but I imagine it'll be much closer to the beer model than the tobacco model, and we'll see a reasonable tax that will generate revenue, but at the same time make sure we can compete with the unregulated market.
I also think that what New Approach Oregon did by having it built in where it will fluctuate in the market, that in itself is going to keep the concern of trying to raise it. But the reality is, if we're really sincere about wanting to cut out the underground market, you're going to have to stay underneath that. And that's the issue I think that Washington State is going through, as they're looking at, I think they're taxing at 3 different levels. And so you're compounding. And clearly you can see the numbers that they're bringing in as extraordinary. But the reality are that in the big picture, are they going to actually diffuse the black market or not? Are they going to be able to actually have people convert and go into the regulated market? I believe what we have from New Approach will actually accomplish that, and that by having the cost of living increase in place, it will in fact allow for that fluctuation as on a more natural basis, and it won't be called out for having these extreme spiking and trying to raise more revenue that's not accommodating with the goal of shutting off the black market.
We talk a lot about marketing and growing and a lot of the legal issues, but I have a question about on consumption and what are the in the law. I'm pretty ignorant on what the new bill says about what are the specific regulations on consumption in public in view of whomever.
So adults over the age of 21 will be able to possess an ounce away from home, cultivate 4 plants, and have 8 ounces per household at home. But they must keep cannabis out of public view, and keep it private. So you can't grow it.
Back porch, not front porch.
Exactly, back porch, not front porch, and keep it out of sight, out of the hands of anyone under 21.
What if you're homeless?
Yeah, right?
So thank you very much, gentlemen, for being here and all the work that you're doing and inspiring others to do. My question now. It's already hard enough for me to be up here asking this question. In some ways, I understand it's my personal issue and I have to work this through. But on the other hand, what better occasion than having so many intelligent people here tonight and to ask for the issue is about marijuana, of course. And it's obviously to me, if you weigh both sides, it should be decriminalized, obviously. But that's not really the issue for me, so it's decriminalized, of course. It has to do with this kind of shadow aspect or stigma aspect, and it's kind of amplified. I have a child, and he's 12 years old, he's a boy, and I consume, I take weed, I smoke sometimes, but still, it's another aspect, and so how do I free myself from the stigma that I'm doing something wrong, that I have a weakness, and therefore, is it something that I want to really put my heart in terms of a message for my son and all children of society for our future. It's something, so that's my issue, and thank you very much.
So, in regards to, having a child, you're much more in danger when marijuana is illegal than you are when it's legal. Because if you're committing an illegal act, then all of a sudden, contributing to the delinquency of a minor, endangering the welfare of a minor, those things come into play. But so long as you're staying within the limits of the law and not going outside the limits of the law, then that type of stigma about parenthood ends. Now, as far as about talking to kids about cannabis, I think it's similar how you talk to them about alcohol or even potentially, birds and the bees, having sex and good sex education with your kids, and that some things are for adults and some things are not. And it's not necessary to criminalize something to keep kids away from it. And when you got to be a certain age to drive a car, to rent a car, to operate a chainsaw, to have consensual sex, to drink alcohol, to smoke tobacco, same thing with marijuana. And it's crucial that we have good drug education and tell the truth about marijuana. The truth that it is something you want to wait till your brains develop before you start using. You don't want to start using at too young of age. Similar with other substances and other activities. And so it's important to really come out of the closet and just speak the truth and stop the charade and nonsense of lumping marijuana in as a Schedule I substance with heroin, meth, and because kids see through that. And I think over time, with true education and that stigma is going to end, and we're going to have kids understand about marijuana in a truthful, reasonable manner. And we've had great success reducing the use of tobacco through regulation, taxation, and education. And we can have the similar drop in teenage use with marijuana as well. Many surveys, polls, kids' own experience and testimonials to me, many kids have a much easier time getting access to marijuana today than they do alcohol. And not only that, when you go to somebody's house who happens to sell marijuana, they may sell other drugs too. So you want to keep kids away from that criminal element. Let's bring it into a regulated market. Let's speak the truth, and let's stop treating marijuana use as a crime, so we can have true drug education and just really speak the truth to our kids. So this gentleman's question about being homeless and using cannabis. So you're going to do your best to stay out of public view the best that you can, and at least under the new approach measure, the penalty will be less for using if you happen to get caught. It's still against the law, but the penalty will be less for using in public. So we'll improve your situation, but unfortunately, being homeless has a whole host of complications and issues, and so I'm sorry we don't fix everything.
Thank you.
You have a question?
Actually, I got some statements about the law. I was collecting signatures, and I saw that this is here that's kind of weird. It says that a person can be denied a license for that this is numbered section 30. That any based on public convenience or necessity warrants canceling or suspending such a license. There's a lot of strange things in here. You can't sell marijuana to a person who's intoxicated. A person who is unable to understand the law cannot get a license. Who's unable to understand this law, this is J, cannot get a license to sell. Any person who is not of good repute and moral character, any person who has maintained an unsanitary establishment, anybody who is in the habit of using alcoholic beverages, habit-forming drugs, marijuana, or controlled substances to excess. Now, those didn't need to be put in there. So those are going to clog things up. And I know from getting signatures, it's a lot harder to change the law than to get a law implemented, as the Aggie there pointed out.
Part of the reason why this law 34, 35 pages long, is that we copy the alcohol statutes really word for word, and we take out beer and wine or alcohol and put in marijuana. So the rules and regulations as far as getting a license will be the same as far as getting a bar license, for have a marijuana retail establishment. And what's considered immoral or ill repute was really different in 1932 than it is in 2014. And the OLCC has to have, a cause to deny this. They can't just deny everybody upon their whim. There's administrative procedures to go with that. And if the OLCC, I think abuses that power, they can be shot down in court, and that could also be something for, legislative changes. I think that, I think one thing to keep in mind when people have any issues with the law, I think look at what the law is now, where nobody can get a license at all to have an establishment, and 1 gram is still against the law, even though it's a fine, and 29 grams can get somebody arrested. They can lose financial aid, job opportunities, employment opportunities. And so this is a measure that will end more than 10,000 arrests and citations every year, have a great impact in really millions of people's lives through creating jobs, generating revenue for important services the state needs, and helping us end prohibition across the country. And so I urge people not to let the perfect be the enemy of the good, and know that we can improve this law. Under the original Medical Marijuana Act that passed in 1998, patients and their caregivers could only grow 3 mature plants and have 3 ounces at home. Thanks to good work of people like Floyd in the legislature, that got jumped to 6 mature plants and 24 ounces. So we have seen improvements of the law, and this will definitely be a law that we'll look at and work to improve over time.
And I would just say, it is a starting point. The reality is, what New Approach Oregon did is they brought people from all directions, all factions, pro and con together, and got their input and put this together. And it's remarkable when you look at, as we say, that this is going to be handled and dealt with similar to beer and wine, and that's the approach that we're taking. But I can assure you that no matter what the legislation is that passes, when you have a large, significant piece of legislation, that policy is in flux. It's a living, breathing document that's going to be changed and modified as we need to do that. The beauty of this, again, is that because it's coming from the citizens, as a citizen initiative, you will not see the legislature be so, willing to be aggressively trying to change something that's been passed by the voters. But instead, what I expect that you will see is that you'll have a lot of constituents around the state going to their individual representatives and their senators and expressing why they think maybe it needs to be modified or changed, or as to why it has benefited them, how they are now able to put food on the table, how they can now maintain their livelihood, and that it is in fact having benefits at the local level. One of the things that New Approach Oregon has done is that if a community such as Monmouth, that was the last dry city, wanted to have a change, they have a process to do that. And I think it's important that we allow for that local control. But it has to be a vote of the people. It cannot be the elected officials making that decision. It will have to go to the polls and to the ballot, and those citizens that might want to contemplate that will have the final say. And so I think you'll see the same type of approach with this on a statewide basis as it matures and goes forward, to ensure that the intent is carried forward and that changes that need to be made will be made, and they'll be made in an intelligent, constructive way.
I'll get to it.
I don't need a microphone.
Okay.
I just want to see everybody here pay attention to one thing. We need to get rid of one word. We need to get rid of the word use for recreational use. Call it adult use when you talk with people. Okay, if you're concerned about your kids, it's called be accountable and responsible. When I was against my parents all my life, they never approved of me drinking alcohol. Me and my buddies would get drunk in high school and drive around all over town. We learned a lot of things through the years, okay? But I learned also how to be accountable and responsible for your own actions. So I think we need to find a way to, because this battle's just starting, okay? With these big corporations are going to come in here, they're going to use this word recreational against you, period. So call it adult use. Let the kids know it's adult use.
Why are they gonna use the word recreational use?
They're gonna use it again, they're gonna bring money into the state, you can't believe. So fight against it.
All right, so I'm gonna just hop in
Figure it out on
here.
your own.
His suggestion is to utilize, adult use instead of recreational. I think there's a certain, connotation to recreational that you're just using, could bring in some thoughts in some people's mind that you're using irresponsibly. I think that's the way you're trying to get towards. I prefer adult use as well, and I'll kind of explain why I prefer adult use, and that's because growing at home and using at home without getting a medical marijuana card or utilizing a new licensed and regulated establishment, and even somebody that doesn't have a medical marijuana card, doesn't mean that they're not a patient. They could use for a condition that hasn't been approved yet by the state. We just added post-traumatic stress disorder, which I don't really like calling a disorder. I think it's a reasonable reaction to a traumatic event. So post-traumatic stress was just added this year. I mean, I think we had 2 petitions to the Oregon Health Authority to add it, and then it finally took a legislative bill to add post-traumatic stress as a qualifying condition. So, veterans, people who underwent traumatic events in their lives, who used for post-traumatic stress, before this year, I don't think they were necessarily using recreationally. They're using to alleviate their condition. There are plenty of people who use cannabis to alleviate anxiety, depression, insomnia, various issues that they use medically, but it's not qualified by the state to get a medical marijuana card. It may be a condition in another state, but it's not a condition here in Oregon. And there could be patients who can't afford the fee because the fee's increased, or they choose not to pay that fee because they're on a fixed income, and so paying an extra $100 or $150 to get a fee to pay for license in the state, they're not going to want to go through that. There could be patients who have a hard time getting a card due to their health issues, or their card may lapse, and so they very well could utilize adult use stores, and it's not for recreational purposes, it's medicinal. So I personally prefer adult use as well.
So we've got a few more questions. I wanted to field the questions that we have now, and then I'd like to allow the panelists to close with some final statements. So I see. We have this gentleman first, and I'll get right to you.
So my question is this: if I am a legal licensed grower for a patient, and when this law comes into effect, theoretically those things will change. Will I be able to I'll be allowed to grow X number of plants based on the current existing law per patient, 6 per patient. If I then also wanted to grow additional plants for myself for adult use, how does that change the total number of plants that I would legally be allowed to grow on a premises?
Wow.
So the medical side is easy. You get 6 plants, 6 mature plants, 18 seedlings per patient, and then your license you get from the OLCC will provide you so many plants per plot, for your plot of land. So there's no reason to stop providing for those patients. There's very well good reasons to continue growing medicinally. You may think you want to make sure the plants have their strains, their plants that work for them. Additionally, there could be, down the road, a change in federal administration. You feel like, hey, growing medicinally, I'm a little better protected than I am just growing for adult use. And so there's nothing in the measures that prohibits you from doing both.
And Anthony, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think for this gentleman, if he was actually growing for himself, then he would fall under the provisions for homegrown. And that would mean that you would be limited to what you could do for yourself, but as a grower for a patient, you'd also have that. So I would expect that those two things would work side by side, and whatever is allowed for homegrown will be what you can claim for yourself, and then you still have to be within the regulations for the OMMP for the patient that you're growing for.
So in effect, the OMMP total number that I'm legitimately allowed to grow for now, plus whatever I would get as a personal adult allowance, that would be one way, or
you could get a license
can also get a license and add that, which would be yet a third number to add to that total number, I presume.
Well, the third, I mean, if you go that other route, there's no limitation as to what you're growing, and so then you have a license, and under that, that's how you would claim it. At least that's what I'm hearing, how the process, how that measure will work, is that if you are a licensed grower, you have whatever the rules and regulations and benefits as a grower under that plan. And at the same time, you can also operate as a grower under the OMMP with the limitations that you have there.
And at the third, and as in addition, just my rights as a citizen to have an adult amount, which is 4 plants.
Yeah, correct. Every household can grow 4 plants. Limited home cultivation, similar to home cultivation of beer, and you can grow for your patients, and you can get a commercial license. We don't set out the limits for commercial licenses, so under the new approach measure, we want to give, really let the market and economy of scale as much leeway as possible. But it's likely within the right of the OLCC to say if you're licensing this acre, you know, you get to grow 70 plants. If you have more land, you can grow more plants. So the OLCC may put a limit on what you can grow, but the measure itself does not. But there's nothing that prevents you from growing for yourself, growing for your patients, and getting a commercial license.
Thank you.
Super quick. Don't need a microphone.
Yes,
So,
everyone needs a microphone.
So, I told you. So in the initiative, I'm confused. There's a license for a producer, there's a license for a wholesaler, and there's a license for a retailer. I don't understand what the wholesaler is. If you're licensed to produce, then you can sell to a retail establishment. What's the wholesale thing? I'm confused.
Yeah, wholesaler just allows you to sell to other wholesalers.
You mean a middleman?
Yeah.
So I would just like to give blessings on this gathering of people that care about cannabis hemp and remind us that my grandparents for history have used this herb and have grown this herb with no licensing fees, with no certification. And I am the daughter of those people, and I know that I can grow still as many carrots as I want and as many tomatoes as I want, and I don't have to sign a form to do that. It's a plant given to us by our Creator, and I'm just here to remind us of that. And also that it's not about money, it's about our Mother Earth. It's about the air and the earth and the children of the future. And that's what I want to say. I love you.
This is in light of dispensaries and retail outlets as far as taking credit cards. There really seems to be a politics-like aspect that takes back to the black market. I mean, OLCC, you go to liquor stores, they'll gladly take a credit card. Is there pressure now with this new law as far as banks working with the dispensaries? There's 2 in the county, but that's like 2 out of 16.
Yeah, access to banking has been an issue for the cannabis industry for sure. We are starting to see those issues improving. The United States House of Representatives has passed 2 amendments recently that are very important. One would defund the DEA from operating in medical marijuana states.
Yeah.
And every congressperson in Oregon voted for that measure, so I think Oregon can take pride in the fact that every single Oregon congressional representative voted to defund the DEA in medical marijuana states. And also recently a bill was passed, or an amendment was passed to really enact like the recent federal guidelines as far as banking goes. And more and more banks are getting comfortable doing business with the cannabis industry, state-regulated cannabis industry, as the federal government has issued new guidelines. And the only way we're going to continue to improve upon that is to continue to move this issue forward state by state. And I think over time we may see more action in the federal government, and potentially even at the state legislature to improve access to banking for sure.
I was wondering, you were talking about how licensed growers in Colorado have cameras in their growers. I was wondering what kind of privacy Oregon growers will have and what kind of privacy when you take license.
You guys hear that?
So the question was, basically, are we going to see kind of like seed-to-sale cameras like there are in Colorado? And in Colorado, and that's part of the reason why they mandated that 70% of what retail outlets sell, they must grow their own, so they could track that. In Oregon, they're going to have a hard time putting cameras on all the growers that we have because we're not doing the same, forced vertical integration. So there will definitely be audits and inspections, and you're going to got to keep your books in order, and you got to make sure you stay within the regulated market. But I don't think you'll see the exact same rules and regulations of video cameras that we see in Colorado.
Oh, come on, create a job for me.
At this point, I'd like to thank all of our panelists, Floyd, Anthony, Paul, and I'd like to thank is it all been said?
The chief sponsor.
And I really appreciate the lady's sentiment about this not being about money. And this fight was never about money for me. I became involved in this cause back in Missouri because I saw my African American friends treated more harshly than my middle class white friends, both in how they were treated by police and then how they were treated by the justice system. And so to me, at the outset, it's ending the barbaric practice of locking people in cages, taking away freedom, educational employment opportunities for utilizing cannabis. So that's first and foremost. And then creating jobs, generating revenue. To me, that's just gravy on top of really pushing forward freedom and a civil rights issue. And we have a great opportunity to really move this issue forward, improve the lives of thousands, if not millions, of Oregonians. And I really encourage everybody, check out newapproachoregon.com, join the fight, not for us, but for grandchildren and people even across this country. So I appreciate everybody's support, and let's end prohibition this year. Thank you.